Archie, and today we are going to watch US B-52 just did something so out of this world. Every time I hear this, I am, flabbergasted by hearing now what US new did and now what new strategy just US applied to Iran, and they are saying that Iran is no more. And previously I was thinking that B stealth bombers are the best because we have been seeing continuous videos about them. But previously we also had seen a video about US B-52 jets, which were very amazing, and I was very excited to see its all new features. So now in this video, maybe we'll know more about it. So let's get into the video.
The US is hammering Iran over and over again, unleashing its full range of bombers to cripple the country's missile-based strategy. Now, something the US built in the 1950s is crushing all of the weapons Iran wanted to use in 2026. The B-52 Stratofortress has been unleashed and is conducting some of the most devastating strikes that Iran has seen so far. Iran's missiles are no more, and its regime is facing up to a very simple fact. This is just the beginning. We'll tell you why that is later in the video. First, here's what the US has been doing with its B-52s now that it's established air superiority, and some might even say supremacy, over Iran in the wake of the US and Israel destroying 80% of Iran's air defenses. The week leading up to March 9th has seen the US unleash constant strikes against Iran after its stealth bombers and fighter jets crippled the air defenses that Iran could have used to stop those strikes. The B-52 has been at the heart of these attacks, as US Central Command has made clear by releasing footage of these old bombers taking off en route to the country. What we have here is the sledgehammer after the surgical strikes. The US is able to use the oldest bomber that it has in its fleet to fly deep within Iranian territory now that the air defense threat has been practically cancelled out. The B-52 pilots still have to be careful. Isolated air defense systems still remain, though America's bombers are getting a helping hand from several sources that we'll uncover in a moment. But what the US is now doing is using its B-52s to rain down immense amounts of firepower on Iran. And those bombers have one type of target that they're hitting with abandon: Iran's missile infrastructure. Max Afterburner explains more, stating that America's F-22 and F-35 stealth airframes have taken out whatever defenses that Iran had. EA-18G Growlers have also helped to create safe aerial corridors inside Iran, which allow the B-52s to fly directly where they need to go to strike targets. Those other airframes are creating a pathway for the B-52 Stratofortress to make its way into Iran and do some big things, as we're seeing, because the B-52 is hammering what's left of the missile network from Iran, hammering the production facilities as well, Afterburner says. The Warzone, or TWZ, expands on what America's B-52s have been doing, noting that the first of these bombers that arrived in Iran attacked intelligently as Iran's air defenses were being crippled. That first wave of B-52s arrived from bases in the United States, conducting 30-plus hour round trips in the process, and deliver AGM-158 JASSM missiles to targets throughout the country. This approach overcame the lack of stealth in the B-52 itself. The AGM-158 is a stealthy cruise missile that could pass by Iran's air defenses undetected. Firing those missiles from a distance, perhaps even from outside of Iran's airspace, via bases in Iraq or friendly Gulf countries, allowed the US to hit hard with its aging bombers without risking them to Iran's air defenses. The situation has changed with the latest strikes. As for Iran, it's feeling the pain from what the US is doing. Afterburner's mentions of America using B-52s to take out what's left of Iran's missile infrastructure demonstrate a clear tactic at play, and it's working. According to I-24 News, Israel is claiming that about 70% of Iran's missile launchers have been taken out of commission already, which has severely limited Iran's ability to strike back at the US or Israel. Iran has been able to salvage some of its damaged launchers, the outlet reports, but they're being moved into underground facilities that are being targeted with bunker-busting bombs, so they're not much use, even if they're repaired. The Wall Street Journal adds that Iran's missile threat has been so thoroughly degraded that what was meant to be a saturation strategy has devolved into Iran taking risky potshots at its enemies with its limited launches. Iran's ballistic missile launches are down 90% compared to the first day of the war by March 6th, and it seems that Iran has been forced to focus on persistent small strikes ahead of the volume that it favors, all due to B-52s and the other airframes that have been crippling its missile network. So the US strategy here is simple: keep hitting Iran's missiles hard, and persistence will degrade into non-existence. That's what we've seen with the most recent use of the B-52 in Iran. Afterburner explains, noting that just 2 hours before he published his March 9th analysis, footage was released of America's bombers scoring direct hits on Iranian ballistic missile launchers, along with the country's missile production facilities. Don't underestimate the importance of these secondary strikes. While the priority was always to take Iran's missile launchers out of the game, along with destroying as much of the country's ballistic missile stockpiles as possible, Iran also had ambitious plans for building up the stockpile in the coming years. According to the Israeli military, Iran has been ramping up its missile production in recent months, with the eventual goal being to build a stockpile of 8,000 ballistic missiles by 2027. That can't be allowed to happen. Having that many missiles would allow Iran to devastate almost any target in the Middle East with its preferred saturation strategy, assuming that it's able to hide enough of its launchers away as the B-52 strike. So what we're seeing the US do here is switch its focus to the means of missile production, now that it's bombed Iran's missile launchers and existing stockpiles so heavily that they've been forced to go into hiding. The goal here is to make Iran's missile production stagnant, which means that every launch that Iran's regime attempts from now on eats into a stockpile that isn't getting replenished, due to the B-52s destroying the facilities that make Iran's ballistic missiles. It's a brilliant move by the US, and now the B-52s are getting a helping hand to ensure that they hit Iran precisely, as well as heavily. We mentioned that helping hand earlier, and Afterburner explains where it's coming from. Likely these strikes, some of them coming from the B-52 with a Predator drone doing ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, Afterburner says. In other words, the US has evolved its bomber strategy by using drones to scout out the area. The Predators are carrying out battle damage assessments to see what's been hit, what remains to be hit, and what Iran has that could pose a threat to the B-52s as they move in for the next kill. What this allows the B-52 pilots to do is not only chart the safe aerial corridors that had already been created during the initial days of the war, but also find safe offshoot paths toward targets that have yet to be hit. It's an extremely efficient way to use drones that, unless they are attacking, aren't going to present enough of a threat to the stragglers of Iran's air defense network to become targets themselves. And what we may be seeing here is the US taking a few lessons from the Ukraine war, particularly in terms of using drones to conduct reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, and applying those lessons to multiply the force being delivered by an aerial arsenal that is far more advanced and powerful than the one at Ukraine's disposal. Predators are well suited to this particular job too, as they've been designed with endurance and multi-mission functionality in mind. The drone has a range of 770 miles, meaning it can scout a large area ahead of a B-52 bombing range. Able to climb to an altitude of 25,000 feet, the Predator can also stay out of the range of many of Iran's air defense systems. The unit cost is a little high at $20 million, though a single Predator unit actually includes 4 of the drones, along with sensors, a ground control station, and a satellite link. In this drone, the US has, and is deploying, an intelligence-gathering machine that also just happens to be capable of attacking a target with its 450-pound payload, if the time calls for it. And on top of information coming in from drones, the B-52 pilots are receiving more data from other sources. I mean, they can see exactly where these targets are, Afterburner says of the B-52s, and they're pumping information from other fighters, MQ-9s, RQ-4 Global Hawks, pumping information to the B-52 in real time to show it where these targets are and what needs to be struck next. What this means is that America's B-52s can execute their strikes in waves. They hit hard, restock, and come back, and then hit hard again at a whole new raft of targets. And with a combat range that is in excess of 8,800 miles, the B-52 can essentially loiter in the skies as its pilot waits for the next piece of information. The next target comes in, a button is pressed, and a precision bomb gets sent flying in the direction of whatever needs to be hit. It's an extremely effective approach, and we'll tell you why in just a moment. But before we get to that, this is The Military Show. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to hit the button so you never miss the latest Iran war news. According to Afterburner, this approach, which had followed on from the initial wave of B-52 strikes, has led to America's aging bomber striking 200 targets in the 72 hours leading up to March 9th. And each of these strikes takes another slice out of Iran's missile power. When the B-52 hits, Iran loses a launcher, or it loses a missile stockpile, or one of the tunnels that it uses to transport missiles around its underground bases. And with each of these losses, Iran also loses the ability to conduct attacks against Israel, US bases, or the Gulf neighbors who are directly or indirectly supporting the American war effort. What the US is doing here is turning Iran into a country that has a missile-focused military doctrine, but no missiles to follow it through. It's doing all of this with a bomber that is well over 60 years old. But don't let the age fool you. The B-52 is far from a creaking airframe that the US is deploying because it has nothing better in its arsenal. This is the same bomber that the US Air Force points out delivered about 40% of all weapons that coalition forces dropped during Operation Desert Storm. And what's happening in Iran right now is proof that the B-52 is still the deliverer of immense amounts of firepower that it always has been. Sure, it's not a stealth bomber like B-2 that the US used in its initial strikes, But the B-52 can still reach speeds of Mach 0.84 or around 650 miles per hour, and it carries around 70,000 pounds of weapons, which can include bombs, missiles, and even mines. And it's this payload capacity that is the entire point. Unlike a fighter jet, which can unload a handful of missiles and perhaps a few bombs, the B-52 can rattle off dozens of precision bombs in a single attack, often taking out multiple targets per sortie before it needs to be reloaded with new bombs. As the Iran war goes on, we're also seeing the role that the B-52 plays start to evolve. We mentioned earlier, the first B-52s the US used fired standoff weapons, likely from the territory of friendly countries. But as more of Iran's air defense network has collapsed, a change in approach has started. Afterburner explains more, stating, "These B-52s can roll in, release their cruise missiles from a standoff distance, and then just continue flying in. With air superiority established in Iran, the B-52s can follow up their initial wave of attacks with strikes from inside Iran itself. It's likely that the bombers are firing Joint Direct Attack Munitions, or JDAMs, loaded with 2,000-pound bombs for this purpose. And with a 70,000-pound payload, the B-52 can bring 35 of these heavy-hitting bombs to a strike, which it can use to utterly devastate a target. That's what we're seeing throughout Iran right now. And thanks to another recent development, we're likely going to be seeing a lot more of it in the coming days. Stick with us and we'll explain why. But before we get into that, Afterburner adds that what we're seeing now in Iran is the US executing on its own air superiority doctrine so well that it's shattered whatever strategy that Iran may have had in place before the first bombs dropped in late February. America's B-52s are carrying out wave after wave of strikes, Afterburner points out, and they're neutralizing potential threats before they ever have the chance to become actual threats to the US, Israel, or the many Gulf nations that Iran is trying to target. The tactics are textbook here, Afterburner explains, adding, "Suppress air defenses, first with stealth, create the silent corridors, and then bring in the heavies for that sustained pressure." The B-52 is among the heaviest of the heavies.
Yes,
Iran is feeling all 70,000 pounds of its payload weight every single day. Now, we mentioned a recent development that is going to lead to a lot more of the B-52s wreaking havoc in Iran in the coming days. That development is simple. The UK is now allowing the US to use its air bases. Specifically, RAF Fairfoot is in play, and it will likely be joined by the Diego Garcia base in the Indian Ocean. According to TWZ, 3 of America's B-52s have already arrived at the former base as of March 9th, having made the journey from Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. And now that those bombers are there, Iran is set to discover what a truly sustained campaign is really all about. Why? Well, the simple answer is that the UK allowing the US to use its air bases significantly cuts down on travel time for America's B-52s. Before the UK allowed the US in, America's B-52s had to travel from the US to Iran. Sure, they could be stationed at bases nearby once they arrived, but that came with the risk of being targeted by Iranian missile strikes. But even without taking that into consideration, the B-52s had to fly over the Atlantic Ocean, then over Europe and parts of Asia to reach their targets. Multiple aerial refueling stops were needed to get the bombers to Iran and back.
After watching this video, I just feel like Iran is totally alone over here, because even here the UK is also helping somewhere, because UK is allowing USA to use their bases. And also I just feel like who is in the side of Iran, because I think so everybody knows that America is a superpower and future holds America. And I just feel like if the war is happening in the future, I think so there will be like 2 to 3 countries that are with the Iran, and the whole world is in the side of the USA.
Exactly. USA is a superpower, we all know, and I would like to appreciate the US B-52s because, as I said, I was a big fan of B-2 stealth bombers, but B-52s are no less than anymore. And as we know that B-52s are now here to dismantle the Iran's missile strategy, the jets are clearing the missiles in the skies, and the drones are there guiding the full precision. And here are the B-52s now going on into the missile strategy. So I guess this is increasing day by day, and this is now a full-fledged war, and I really think that Iran is going to fully dismantle. Nobody is going to be the side of Iran, as Muskan said. So what do you guys think about this video? Let me know in the comment section below. So do like, share and subscribe.
Bye.